I'm Nicole Halberg, 30 years old. I'm a civil litigation paralegal in Austin, Texas, and last year I lost my father after a long illness. What happened with my sister after the funeral nearly destroyed me, but marrying her lawyer, that changed everything. The last time I saw my father's eyes open, he was staring out the window of his hospice room. Sunlight streamed across his pale skin, and he blinked slowly like he was memorizing the shape of the oak tree outside for the very last time. He didn't look at me, not directly, but I held his hand anyway, whispering the stories he used to tell me when I was little. I wanted him to hear my voice, to know that I was there, even if he couldn't answer anymore. Now, just 5 days later, I stood over his closed casket, my knees wobbling slightly as the weight of everything pressed down on my chest like a cinder block. The lilies were overpowering, too sweet, too strong, too fake. Everyone kept telling me how beautiful the service was, how moving my eulogy had been, but their words were a distant blur like voices behind thick glass. I barely heard them, all I could think was, he's really gone. Then I saw her. Jenna. My sister swept into the church like it was a cocktail hour, fashionably late, sunglasses still on, lips painted firetruck red. She gave a tight smile to the usher, whispered something that made him laugh, then glided past the pews as if she weren't nearly an hour late to our father's funeral. She didn't even glance at me. And yet I couldn't stop watching her. She looked stunning, of course. She always did. Perfect hair, designer heels, that blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But there was something else in her eyes that day, something cold, detached. Like she was walking into a meeting, not a moment of mourning. We buried Dad at St. Augustine's Cemetery under the giant pecan tree where he used to read books in the summer. I stood front and center, trying to stay upright as the pastor recited scripture. Jenna lingered at the back, arms folded, jaw tight. She didn't shed a single tear, didn't even look at the coffin as they lowered it. I told myself not to judge, people grieve in different ways. I repeated that over and over like a mantra, but deep down something felt wrong. Back at the house, friends and neighbors gathered with casseroles and polite condolences. The hallway was crowded with voices and plates and hands patting my back. I should have felt comforted, but instead I felt like I was floating above it all, detached, watching it happen through a fog. That's when I saw Jenna again. She was in Dad's study. Alone. The door was slightly cracked, and through the gap I could see her crouched in front of his locked drawer, the one he always kept sealed, even from us. It held documents, records, things he once told me only mattered when it mattered most. Her fingers hovered over the keyhole. She was using a hairpin. "What are you doing?" I asked, stepping inside. She jumped, clearly startled, then laughed a little too quickly. "Oh God, you scared me." I didn't smile. She stood and brushed imaginary lint off her sleeve. "I was just looking for tissues." "There's a box in the kitchen," I said. My voice came out sharp, even I could hear it. She tilted her head. "Nicole, are you seriously accusing me of something right now, at Dad's funeral?" I didn't answer, I didn't need to. She walked past me, murmuring, "Unbelievable," and disappeared into the hallway. Later that night, after everyone had left and the house was silent, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, staring at Dad's photo on the mantel. The one of us at my law school graduation, his hand on my shoulder, both of us smiling like the world was still whole. That's when I remembered something. A few months before he died, Dad had asked me to speak with his estate attorney just in case. "You're the responsible one," he'd said with a tired smile. "Jenna, well, you know how she is." At the time, I didn't think much of it. But now I couldn't ignore the knot in my stomach. The next morning, I called his attorney, Daniel Morgan. He handled all of Dad's legal matters for years. I'd spoken to him once briefly after Dad was diagnosed. This time I asked to meet in person. Daniel's office was sleek and quiet, with walls lined with law books and warm lighting that made everything feel strangely calm. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said genuinely. I nodded, grateful he didn't try to overcomfort me. "I need to see the will," I said. He didn't hesitate. He pulled a manila folder from his drawer, placed it between us, and slid it open. The language was clear. The estate was to be split evenly, 50-50 between Jenna and me. "So then, why is she acting like she owns everything?" I asked quietly. Daniel hesitated, then pulled out another document. A power of attorney form. With my signature. Only I'd never signed it. My heart slammed into my ribs. That's not mine, I whispered. I thought as much, Daniel said. She presented it just days before your father passed, insisted on expedited access to the accounts. Said you agreed to let her handle it because you were overwhelmed. She lied, I said, my voice was trembling now. He nodded. I didn't feel right about it. That's why I flagged the transactions and stalled some of the asset releases. But she was persistent. My head spun. How much did she take? He opened another folder. Approximately $280,000, liquidated investments, sold assets, moved fast. I felt like I couldn't breathe. She didn't just lie. She robbed us. She robbed him. Daniel looked at me gently. If you want to pursue this, we can start with a handwriting analyst, then petition the court to freeze the estate. I stared at my own name in forged ink. This wasn't just about money. This was betrayal. I want to fight, I said. He nodded once, then we will. As I walked out of his office, something shifted in me. Grief and rage had intertwined into a steel wire pulled tight through my spine. Jenna thought she could steal from the dead and walk away clean. But she was about to learn something. I wasn't the quiet sister anymore. The sun was glaring when I stepped out of Daniel's office, but I hardly noticed. My hand was still trembling from the weight of the file in my purse. Every time I thought of Jenna's handwriting mimicking mine, my name, signed like it meant nothing, it made my stomach twist. That night I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, playing every childhood memory on loop. All the times I covered for her. All the times she borrowed my things, made promises, crossed lines, always knowing I'd never push back hard enough to stop her. This time she crossed a line she couldn't walk back from. The next morning, I called Daniel and told him to move forward with everything, the analyst, the court petition, freezing the assets. He was calm and efficient, but I could hear the protective edge in his voice. You're doing the right thing, he said, but it won't be easy, she's going to fight. I know, I whispered, so will I. A few days later, Daniel invited me to his office again. He wanted to walk me through the preliminary timeline. I agreed, but as I stepped through the glass doors, I felt something shift. Maybe it was the way he stood when I walked in, like he'd been waiting. Maybe it was the coffee he handed me, already made exactly how I liked it, 2 sugars, no cream. Maybe it was just the fact that for the first time in weeks, someone treated me like a human being, not a victim. We sat across from each other and Daniel unfolded the latest documents. His voice was clear, professional, but his eyes, they were something else. I wanted to show you this, he said, sliding a forensic report toward me. The analyst confirmed what we suspected. It's not your signature, not even close. I ran my fingers over the printed words. Relief didn't come, just a heavy silence. She didn't even try to hide it, I said, barely above a whisper. She thought she wouldn't have to, Daniel replied, that you never question her. He didn't say it with judgment, just quiet certainty. I looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't just a lawyer doing his job. He believed me. He saw me. Something inside me ached, not from pain, but from recognition. Thank you, I said, for believing me. Daniel nodded, always. That night I drove home with a new kind of weight in my chest, not grief, not rage, is something more complicated. Something I didn't have a name for yet. But Jenna wasn't done. The next morning I woke up to a voicemail from a blocked number. No words, just a long silence followed by slow, audible breathing. I froze, phone clutched in my hand, my heart raced. I didn't need to hear a name, I knew it was her. I played it again. And again. Something about it was worse than screaming. It was intentional, controlled, like a ghost whispering just close enough to rattle the air. Then came the texts. You're making this worse. This doesn't have to go nuclear. You don't know what you're doing. I showed them to Daniel. She's escalating, he said, jaw tight. She's scared, I replied. He looked at me carefully. That's not your problem. I wanted to agree, but a lifetime of being Jenna's fixer doesn't dissolve in a week. Still, I nodded, filed the harassment notice. That night, I couldn't stay in my apartment. The walls felt too close. Every shadow looked like her. I ended up at a diner off I-35, the kind Dad used to take us to after softball games. I sat in the back booth staring at a plate of cold fries. I didn't expect anyone to show up. But Daniel did. He slid into the booth across from me without a word, just sat there. I looked at him, exhausted. How did you know where I was? You left the file on your kitchen counter, he said, smiling gently. It had a diner receipt sticking out. I laughed, the first real laugh in days. It felt strange and shaky, like a rusty door creaking open. I don't know how to do this, I admitted, any of it. You don't have to, he said. You just have to take the next step. I'll walk the rest with you. We sat for hours talking, not about Jenna, not about the case. About our dads. About long drives with the windows down. About how grief sneaks up on you, not in big sobs, but in quiet moments, like reaching for the phone and realizing there's no one to call. I told him about my father's hands, how they always smelled like wood shavings and coffee, how he used to leave notes in my lunchbox, how he taught me to ride a bike, and how I crashed it into the neighbor's fence the same day. Daniel listened. Really listened. And when his fingers brushed mine across the table, I didn't pull away. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something deeper. Trust. The next day, we filed the formal fraud petition. Jenna responded immediately with a countersuit. She claimed I manipulated our father during his illness, said I coerced him into rewriting the will, said Daniel and I were conspiring together. My hands shook as I read her affidavit. She's coming for both of us now, I told Daniel. She won't win, he said, not this time. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just legal anymore. This was personal. She wanted to destroy me. Because the only thing Jenna hated more than losing was losing to me. When Jenna countersued me, something in the air shifted, like the storm wasn't just approaching anymore, it had landed. The paperwork was sharp, calculated, cruel. She accused me of coercing our dying father, manipulating his mental state, and using Daniel as my romantic leverage to steal what was rightfully hers. It wasn't just betrayal now. It was war. Daniel warned me to prepare myself, but nothing could have braced me for what she did next. She didn't go after me in court. She went after my career. The HR director at my law firm called me in with a tone I'd never heard before, careful, clipped, like he was reading from a legal script. We received an anonymous tip, Nicole, he said, not meeting my eyes. It included copies of personal emails, also therapy records. My stomach dropped. I knew what emails he meant, ones I'd written years ago in the aftermath of a horrible breakup. Emotional, vulnerable, messy. And the therapy records, I'd trusted Jenna with those back then. I was starting sessions again after Dad's diagnosis, and she offered to help scan paperwork for insurance claims. She kept them. For this. Who sent it? I asked. He hesitated. It was anonymous. Of course it was. They didn't fire me, not yet, but I was put on administrative leave pending internal review, which is corporate speak for, we're watching to see if you ruin our reputation. I left the office that day feeling like I'd been kicked out of my own body. Daniel called the second he heard. Don't come home, I whispered through the phone. Not tonight, I need to be alone. He didn't argue, he knew I meant it. I went straight to my childhood house, Dad's old place, now mine. It was quiet, full of unpacked boxes and dust and grief in the walls. I sat on the floor of his office and cried harder than I had in months. Because it wasn't just Jenna stealing from me anymore. She was dismantling my identity. My job, my mental health, my name. I cried until the carpet beneath me was wet. And then I got angry. Not the shaky kind, not the kind that makes you lash out and regret it. The kind that clarifies everything. I picked up the folder Daniel had given me. Inside were pages of transactions Jenna had initiated. Sales, transfers, signature mismatches, one after another. And then I opened my laptop. I started typing. Emails. Timelines. Every incident. Every text she ever sent. I created a master file of everything for Daniel, for court, for the truth. I was done hiding. I was done hurting. The next morning, I reached out to a woman I hadn't spoken to in a decade, Rachel Kim. She was Jenna's college roommate, and she was the first person I ever saw stand up to my sister. I didn't expect her to respond. But she did. "Nicole," she wrote, "I believe you." She forged my signature once too on a rental lease in college. I lost $600 because of it. I let it go. I shouldn't have. If you need a statement, I'll send it. She emailed the affidavit within 24 hours. Daniel submitted it to the probate court. And just like that, for the first time, Jenna's version of the story wasn't the only one on the record. We were gaining ground. But Jenna, she doubled down. That same night, she showed up at my apartment. Pounded on the door like it owed her something. I peeked through the peephole. Her face was flushed, makeup smudged, hair wild like she hadn't slept. "Open the door, Nicole," she screamed. "You think you've won." I didn't move, I didn't breathe. "You think that little boyfriend lawyer of yours is going to save you? I know things, I've got proof. You remember 2022, you remember what you sent to Ethan." My whole body went cold. Ethan was my ex, the one who ghosted me after a year of dating, the one I wrote a string of raw, unhinged emails to when I found out he'd cheated, emails I was embarrassed of even when I wrote them. Jenna had kept them. That was always her greatest strength, collecting your worst moments, filing them away like knives, waiting until you were most exposed. "You're sick," I whispered through the door. But she was already walking away. The next day, Daniel came over. I showed him everything. I expected him to tell me to call the police, to prepare for more court. Instead, he reached out and gently touched my hand. "None of this is your fault," he said. "I know," I replied, but my voice cracked anyway. We sat in silence for a while, then we talked. Really talked. Not just about the case. About loss, about control, about the difference between surviving and living. He told me about his parents' divorce, how his dad disappeared into work and his mom into silence, how it shaped who he became. I told him about how I used to think Jenna was my anchor, that if I could just make her love me the way I loved her, I'd finally feel whole. "That's not love," Daniel said softly, "that's trauma." We didn't kiss that night. But something between us shifted. Something sacred. Later that week, Jenna filed another motion, one that changed everything. A restraining order. Against me. Claiming I was stalking her, threatening her, emotionally unstable. And worse, she included Daniel in her accusations. That I was using sex to manipulate legal outcomes. That's when I realized Jenna didn't just want to win. She wanted to erase me. But what she didn't understand was that I wasn't afraid anymore. Because sometimes, when someone tries to ruin you, they end up setting you free. I didn't sleep the night after the restraining order came in. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, staring at the official seal on the envelope, reading the allegations over and over. It didn't feel real, my own sister, painting me as dangerous, manipulative, unstable. It was so far from who I was that it bordered on absurd, and yet there it was, in black and white. Daniel came over early that morning, wearing a gray sweater and exhaustion. "She's trying to scare you into dropping everything," he said, pouring us both coffee. "She's doing more than that," I whispered. "She's trying to destroy who I am." He didn't argue, he didn't try to comfort me with clichés. He just nodded, because he understood that this wasn't just a legal attack. It was personal, intimate, targeted. That day, I decided to go back to Dad's house. I hadn't stepped foot inside since the funeral. The living room still smelled faintly like old books and pipe tobacco. His slippers were tucked neatly by the fireplace. A ghost lived in that house now, not one that haunted, but one that waited. I wandered into the garage where he used to keep his old tools and boxes of memories. I hadn't opened them in years. One box was labeled in thick black marker, for Nicole. My breath caught. I dropped to my knees and opened it slowly, heart thudding. Inside were familiar things, drawings from elementary school, my first merit badge from Scouts, a dried rose from prom. And at the very bottom, under a stack of photographs, an envelope. Sealed. With my name on it. It was his handwriting. Hands trembling, I sat down on the cold concrete floor and opened it. The paper was yellowed at the edges. He'd written it 6 weeks before he died. Nicole, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I know, knowing your sister, something has happened. I tried, I really did. I wanted to believe she'd change, but she doesn't know how to love without control. I've spent years hoping she'd soften, that you two would find each other again, but I see it clearly now. You've always had a good heart, too good sometimes. You give, and she takes and takes. And I know you'll try to forgive her, maybe even protect her again. But I'm asking you not to, not this time. Protect yourself. Love isn't always about saving someone else. Sometimes it's about not letting them drown you with them. I love you, I'm proud of you, always have been. Dad. I pressed the paper to my chest and cried until I couldn't breathe. He knew. He saw it, he saw her, he saw me. He believed me. That letter cracked something open in me that had been frozen since the day he died. It gave me something I hadn't had in months: clarity. I scanned it and emailed it to Daniel. He called me 10 minutes later. His voice was thick with emotion. This changes everything, he said. Not legally, I replied, but to me, everything. He offered to come over, but I said I needed one more night in the house. Alone. That evening, I sat in Dad's recliner with a cup of chamomile tea and the photo album he made when I graduated from law school. Each page had handwritten notes beside it. Little quotes, inside jokes. My heart ached in the best way. I slept in my old room that night. The mattress was too firm, the sheets still smelled like storage, but I slept. Not restlessly, not out of exhaustion. I slept because I finally felt held. The next morning, Daniel picked me up for the hearing. I wore my father's funeral suit, black, tailored, serious. The same one I wore when I stood by his casket. It still smelled faintly like cedar and resolve. Outside the courthouse, there were reporters. The headline from Jenna's restraining order had made the rounds: sister, lover, threat, estate feud turns ugly. I ignored them. Daniel stood beside me like a wall. Inside, Jenna was already seated. She wore white again, soft makeup, hair pulled back, the perfect picture of innocence. She even had a tissue in her hand before anyone said a word. The judge opened the hearing. Jenna's lawyer stood, speaking in practiced tones. Your Honor, Ms. Halberg has demonstrated a clear pattern of harassment, emotional instability, and inappropriate conduct, including what we believe to be a romantic relationship with the legal executor of her father's estate, a severe conflict of interest. I didn't flinch. Daniel rose next. Your Honor, the executor duties have since been transferred to a neutral third party. My relationship with Ms. Halberg began after those duties ended, and I find it deeply offensive that a grieving woman's emotional support system is being weaponized against her as proof of instability. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, letter in hand. I read it out loud. Every word. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Even Jenna looked frozen. The judge looked down at his notes, then up at me. Do you have anything else you'd like to say? I nodded. My sister may think this is about money, but it never was. I'd give every dollar back to have one more afternoon with my father. She didn't just steal from me. She stole my peace, my grieving process, my safety. But I'm not here to destroy her. I'm here to protect myself, just like my father asked me to. The judge leaned back in his chair. He denied the restraining order. He also filed a recommendation to the estate court, noting that Jenna had initiated multiple patterns of harassment and false legal filings. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was exhausted and clean. Outside the courthouse, Daniel waited with open arms. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Later that night, he made dinner, simple pasta and wine. We sat on the floor of my apartment, backs against the couch, laughing about how awful the sauce turned out. And then he kissed me. It was soft, slow, and inevitable. It didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a home. That night in his arms, I whispered, I never thought I'd feel safe again. He pulled me closer. With me, he said, you are. I thought the letter would be the end. I thought the courtroom win, the judge's firm dismissal, the relief of hearing Daniel say you're safe, would mark the moment it was all behind me. But peace, I was learning, doesn't always arrive quietly. 3 days later, my law firm called. Not HR, not my supervisor. The managing partner. We've concluded our internal investigation, he said. There's no evidence of misconduct on your part, but in light of recent media exposure and reputational risk, we feel it's best if we mutually part ways. My mouth went dry. You're firing me. We're offering you 6 months severance and a letter of recommendation, he said gently. Nicole, you've been a valued part of this team, but this kind of publicity. It's not my fault, I snapped. She leaked private medical records, staged a restraining order. I'm not disagreeing, but it's out there now. I didn't argue, there was no point, the decision was made. That night I sat on the edge of my bathtub, knees tucked to my chest, my severance letter folded on the floor beside me. I stared at the grout between tiles like it had answers. Daniel came over with dinner, but I couldn't eat. I just lay on the couch while he ran his fingers gently through my hair. She's taking everything, I whispered, piece by piece. She's losing control, he said, that's what this is. I wanted to believe him, but I didn't feel like I was winning. I felt like I was bleeding from 1,000 tiny cuts no one could see. The next morning, I received a message that felt like it was from a different lifetime. Rachel Kim again. Nicole, I just wanted you to know I told my boss about the affidavit. He's in estate law too, he asked if he could talk to you. We connected later that afternoon. He wasn't offering a job, not yet, but he wanted to consult me on a case, see if I could help. It was small, a dispute over a mother's will, but it was something. And I needed something. I'm not at my best right now, I warned him. He smiled kindly through the video call. Nicole, the fact that you're still standing after what you've been through, that's your best. I said yes. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like my voice mattered again. But Jenna wasn't done. That Sunday, I was heading home from the grocery store when I noticed a car parked across from my apartment. Tinted windows, no plates. I didn't panic at first. Until it was there again the next day. And the next. Daniel reported it to the police. They couldn't prove anything, no threats, no property damage, nothing to act on. But I knew. Jenna wanted me to see it, to feel watched, to feel small again. Instead of shrinking, I invited Daniel to stay the week. We cooked together, laughed, even made plans. One night over dinner he said, we could move, start fresh, somewhere quieter, somewhere Hershido doesn't reach. It hit me like a soft wave, not fear, not pressure, just possibility. I don't want to run, I said. He reached for my hand, not run, begin. We didn't decide that night. But we started imagining. What we didn't imagine was what happened next. On Tuesday morning, just after sunrise, someone knocked on my door. 3 times, soft, hesitant. I opened it slowly, bracing for a reporter, another legal document, maybe even Jenna. But it wasn't any of those. It was her. And a little girl stood beside her. Jenna looked nothing like herself. No makeup, no blowout, just jeans, a sweatshirt, and swollen eyes. Her daughter peeked out from behind her leg. She looked to be about 6, big brown eyes, a little stuffed bunny clutched in her hand. Ivy, Jenna said, her voice cracking, this is your Aunt Nicole. I blinked. I hadn't even known she had a child. Ivy, she said gently, say hi. Ivy stepped forward and held out a piece of folded paper, a drawing, stick figures, a red-haired woman holding hands with a smaller one. I knelt down. Hi, Ivy, I said, voice shaking. That's a beautiful drawing. She said you were nice, Ivy whispered. Are you mad at Mommy? Tears pricked my eyes. I looked up at Jenna. What are you doing here? She inhaled shakily. I lost my job, I lost the apartment, the account's frozen, I don't have anywhere else to go, I don't want anything from you, I wanted you to meet her. Daniel stepped into the hallway behind me, his presence alone steadied me. She's not safe with you, I said flatly. I know, Jenna whispered. I'm not asking you to forgive me, I needed her to see you, I needed her to know someone good. She turned to leave. Wait, I said suddenly, where are you going now? She looked over her shoulder. I don't know. She didn't beg, didn't ask for help, just left that ache hanging in the air. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it. Daniel said nothing. Because he knew what I knew. Something had cracked in Jenna. And for the first time, it wasn't manipulation. It was surrender. After Jenna left with Ivy, the apartment felt impossibly still. I sat at the kitchen counter for nearly an hour, just staring at the drawing Ivy had given me, her tiny handprints smudging the crayon lines, her careful lettering that spelled Aunt Nico in shaky, misspelled strokes. Daniel stood by the window, arms folded, watching the street in case the car returned. She's unraveling, he said. I think she knows it's over. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because the next morning, everything exploded. A local gossip blog, one that lived off scandal and spectacle, published a full article titled, "Legal Seduction, Estate Battle Escalates Between Sisters, Romance and Restraining Orders." It used my full name, my photo, and Jenna's story. According to the article, I had emotionally manipulated a grieving father, weaponized a romantic relationship with his lawyer, and forced a breakdown in the estate proceedings through psychological instability. There were screenshots of the therapy records, of the emails to Ethan, of the restraining order filing, even though it had been dismissed. She leaked everything. Daniel found me sitting on the floor of my closet, curled into myself, phone in hand, reading the comments. Some were cruel. Some were vile. Most weren't even about the truth, just anonymous people judging, mocking, feeding off drama. He took the phone gently out of my hands. "We'll sue them for defamation," he said. I shook my head. "No, that's what she wants. Another courtroom, another battle." He paused. "Then what do you want?" I couldn't answer. Because I didn't know anymore. I didn't know who I was outside of this fight. That night I sat in front of my laptop and started writing, not for court, not for press, for me. I wrote everything, from the funeral to the forged signature, from Dad's letter to Ivy's drawing. I didn't filter it. I didn't try to make myself look strong. And then I posted it. On my personal blog, the one I hadn't touched in years. A blog where I used to write about grief and healing and hard things that didn't fit inside small talk. I clicked publish and walked away. Daniel read it in the morning. "I've never been prouder of anything I've helped file in court," he said with a quiet smile. "But that's real power." The blog didn't go viral. It didn't need to. But people read it. And slowly the narrative began to shift. Old colleagues messaged me, former classmates, even strangers, women who had sisters like Jenna who had lived in shadows and tried to escape with grace. One woman wrote, "Thank you for reminding me I'm not crazy for walking away from my sister. We're not heartless, we're just healing." It was the first time in months that I felt understood. Not pitied. Not judged. Understood. Later that week, Daniel met with the judge again to finalize the estate's reassignment. He came home with a quiet look in his eyes. "It's done," he said. "Jenna?" I asked. He handed me a signed statement. She had relinquished her rights, fully, no contest. Along with a letter, not public, just for me. It read, "You were never the weak one. I just couldn't stand how strong you actually were. I don't expect forgiveness, but Ivy, she deserves to know what love without conditions looks like. Do with this what you will. Jay." I folded the letter and put it away. Not because I wasn't angry, but because I was tired. Tired of carrying her weight on my back like a second spine. Daniel and I packed our boxes that weekend. We decided, Asheville, a quiet town with mountains and bookstores and room to breathe. I left a framed copy of Dad's letter in my old bedroom. And the drawing from Ivy. Because some things aren't meant to be carried forever. They're meant to be remembered. As we drove out of the city, I didn't look back. Not out of spite. Out of peace. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't trying to fix her. Or defend myself. I was simply done. And ahead of me, for the first time in a very long time, was nothing but open road. I thought we were done with her. The estate was finalized, the lawyers were quiet. The blogs had moved on to juicier stories, a mayor's affair, a celebrity rehab rumor. Daniel and I were settled in Asheville now, a small place near the river with creaky floors and too many bookshelves. We started slow. We painted the walls together, cooked dinner barefoot, and spent evenings with glasses of wine and jazz crackling from a second-hand record player. For the first time, my life felt mine again. I was consulting part-time for a legal nonprofit, nothing glamorous but meaningful, personal, human. And then one morning, a knock at the door. Soft, familiar. I opened it hard in my throat. And there she was. Jenna. Alone. No makeup, no games, no lawyer behind her shoulder. Just my sister. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She held something in both hands, a folder, thick and bent at the corners. Before I could speak, she said, "I'm not here to fight, I promise." Daniel stepped into the room behind me, but I turned and nodded. "It's okay." She entered cautiously, as if expecting to be swallowed by the quiet. "Ivy's at school," she said, sitting down. I needed to come." I waited. She opened the folder. Inside were documents, emails, photographs, some I recognized, some I didn't. "Everything," she said. "It's all in here, what I took when I took it. I even wrote a statement for the court, I'll sign it whenever." I didn't touch the folder. Why now? She looked down at her lap, because she asked me. "Who?" "Ivy." The name made my chest tighten. She asked me why you never came to her birthday, why I never talk about you, why you're not in any pictures, and I realized I couldn't keep pretending the world was against me because she's starting to see through me. Jenna let out a bitter laugh. "She's 6, Nicole, and she already knows I lie." My breath caught. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, "but I wanted her to know the truth, not just what I did, but who you are, because she deserves someone real in her life." I said nothing. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, I'd sob. She wiped her eyes, pulled something else from the folder, a drawing. This one was more detailed than Ivy's first. 3 figures, me, Ivy, and Jenna holding hands. "I told her once that we used to be best friends," she whispered. She asked if that was before or after I got mean. My heart cracked. "She knows," I said, "even if she doesn't have the words yet." "I know," Jenna nodded, "and that's why I'm here." She stood slowly, pushed the folder across the table. "I'm not asking for anything, not custody help, not money, not contact. I just wanted to give you the truth, all of it, before I ruin her too." She walked to the door. Paused. Turned back. "I wasn't always like this," she said, "but I let the wrong things matter for too long, and it cost me everything." Then she left. And for a moment I couldn't move. Daniel sat beside me, waited. Finally I opened the folder. It was all there, every withdrawal, every forged document, letters from her therapist, timeline of events, apologies scribbled in the margins. And at the back, a letter to Ivy. "Mommy made mistakes, big ones, but I'm trying, I'm really trying. And someday when you ask me all the hard questions, I want to have good answers. But until then, just know this, your Aunt Nicole is brave and kind and everything I wanted to be but didn't know how." I put the folder down and cried like I hadn't cried since the funeral. Because it wasn't just guilt anymore. It was grief. For the sister I had. And the one I'd lost. And the one sitting somewhere in a coffee shop, trying to undo years of destruction with a single act of honesty. That night I lit a candle in Dad's memory. Not for closure, but for permission. To let go of the version of Jenna I'd been holding on to, the villain, the saboteur, the thief. And maybe, just maybe, to make space for something else. Something softer. Not trust. Not yet. But truth. And that was a start. I didn't sleep much after Jenna's visit. Even with the folder closed, the truth inside it kept whispering through the walls. I kept picturing her face, not the composed mask she used to wear in courtrooms and family dinners, but the stripped, bare version of her that showed up at my door with nothing left but confessions. Daniel found me standing on the balcony before sunrise, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the gray fog curling over the river. She told the truth, I whispered. He didn't say anything right away, just slipped his hand into mine. That counts for something, I added, as if trying to convince myself. I opened the folder again later that morning. I went page by page through the receipts, the bank statements, the scribbled apologies in the margins. Each line peeled away a version of the story I thought I knew. In the middle of the stack, there was something unexpected, a photo. It was a snapshot from years ago, Jenna and me in our old kitchen making pancakes with Dad. I couldn't have been older than 16. She was laughing. I had flour on my nose. I didn't even remember that photo being taken. But the smile on my face looked real. So did hers. I called her that afternoon. Not because I was ready, but because I needed to hear the sound of her voice without a courtroom between us. She answered on the second ring. Nicole. I read the letter to Ivy, I said. Silence. Then a quiet okay. She'll be proud of you one day for writing it. I heard her swallow on the other end. I'm not proud of me, she said, not yet. I'm not calling to forgive you, I clarified. I didn't think you were, she replied. I hesitated, but I don't hate you either. Her breath caught, I could almost see her gripping the phone like it might dissolve in her hands. I don't want to be your enemy anymore, she said, voice raw. I don't even know if I want to be your sister, I just want to stop hurting people. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I'd spent so long defining myself in opposition to her. Without the war, who were we? Ivy's lucky to have you trying, I said finally. That's more than most kids get. She sniffled. She still asks about you. She made me put your blog post in her scrapbook. My throat tightened. I ended the call not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I'd said all I could say for now. Later that evening, I sat with Daniel on the porch, feet tucked under a blanket, the sun fading into orange. I don't know what comes next, I admitted. You don't have to, he said, you just have to keep choosing yourself. We didn't talk about marriage, or moving again, or kids. We didn't talk about Jenna, or Ivy, or forgiveness. We talked about the peach tree in the backyard, about what books we wanted to read next, about how Dad would have loved the house, how he would have rigged the porch swing to creak on purpose. Sometimes healing doesn't look like fireworks or breakthroughs. Sometimes it's sitting still long enough to hear your own breathing again. The next week, a letter arrived in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I filed the confession with the court. They accepted it. I'm entering a restorative program. Ivy's seeing a counselor. I'm going with her. She drew another picture of you. You're in a yellow dress this time. She said you looked happy. I hope that's true. There was no signature. Just a pressed flower taped to the bottom corner. A daisy. Dad's favorite. I didn't cry this time. I just folded the letter, slid it into the back of my journal, and closed it. Not because the story was over, but because I had finally decided how mine would continue. Not in reaction to someone else. Not as a victim. Not even as a survivor. But as myself. Fully. Quietly. Completely. A week after Jenna's last letter, I stood in front of my closet holding her confession in one hand and the framed photo of Dad in the other. The sun was slanting through the windows in long, warm ribbons. It smelled like cinnamon from the bread Daniel had just pulled out of the oven, and the house felt still, present, safe. I thought of how many versions of myself I had been over the last year. The grieving daughter. The betrayed sister. The accused. The woman clawing her way back to her own name. And now I was just me. And that was enough. I stared at the confession again. The signature was messy, rushed, but it was hers, all of it. The admissions, the accountability, the line where she wrote, I was wrong, not just legally, but as her sister, as a mother, as a person. The court didn't need anything else from me. I could have asked for more. Jail time. Community service. Financial penalties. Reparations for the job I lost, the therapy bills I paid, the nights I couldn't sleep. But I didn't. Because holding someone accountable doesn't always mean keeping them shackled. Sometimes the most radical choice you can make is to not destroy someone. I called Daniel into the room. I want to send it, I said. He looked at me, studying my face. You sure? I nodded. No further legal action, no courtroom, just a record of truth, on file, let her carry it. He stepped forward and kissed my forehead. I'll draft the release terms. Later that day, we walked together to the little courthouse on Main Street. The clerk behind the glass smiled gently as I handed her the signed statement and form. She scanned it into the system, time-stamped it. Done. No gavel, no headlines. Just closure. And choice. Outside, the wind had picked up. I stood for a long time on the courthouse steps, watching the leaves swirl across the sidewalk. You okay? Daniel asked. I turned to him. I'm better than okay. He smiled. Then let's go home. We passed the bookstore on the way, picked up a new novel we'd been meaning to read together, bought fresh pears from the market, talked about building a raised garden bed in the spring. Life felt so regular. And that was a kind of miracle. That night, I opened a new blank page in my journal and wrote 3 words at the top. I forgive myself. Because for months, I'd been carrying guilt I hadn't earned. Guilt for not stopping her sooner. For trusting her. For loving her too much. For not loving her enough. For surviving. I let it all go. The next morning, a package arrived. Inside was a scrapbook. Ivy's. The first page held a drawing, me in a yellow dress standing under a big tree, her next to me holding my hand. A note from Jenna tucked inside. She asked me to send it to you. She said she misses you. I told her one day you'll visit. I told her the truth, that her Aunt Nicole is brave and kind, and that she saved me, not by rescuing me but by refusing to let me break her. Thank you. I'm working on becoming someone who deserves to be your sister. I held the scrapbook to my chest and closed my eyes. I didn't know if I'd ever visit. I didn't know if forgiveness would bloom between us, or if this moment was the closest we'd ever come. But I knew this. Some things can't be undone. But they can be faced. And I had faced it all: grief, betrayal, lies, rage, love. I had walked through fire. And I had come out not burned, but clean. 3 months later, I stood on a hillside behind our new house, watching the morning fog burn off the trees. Daniel had just started planting herbs in the backyard. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance. Ivy's drawing sat in a frame by the window. I was working again, slowly, carefully, writing, consulting, building a new kind of career. Not chasing ambition, but choosing peace. Sometimes I still think of Jenna. I picture her walking Ivy to school, holding her hand, learning to be a better mother than she had been a sister. And maybe that's the point. We don't always get a happy ending, but we get a choice. And I